What's up, guys? So for today's video, I'm going to be teaching you how to do a handstand. Now, I can't guarantee that this is the most textbook way to do it, but I think it's important for me to teach you exactly how I learned how to do it. Because all too often on YouTube, I think people learn a skill and then they make a tutorial on how to do that skill, but they suggest and recommend a bunch of different things that they didn't actually do to get there. So today I'm going to share all of the different exercises and tips that I learned along the way to eventually get my first handstand. Now, what I'll say about doing handstands is to do whatever works for you. If you go on YouTube, you'll find a lot of videos, and there are opinionated videos, borderline even religious videos on how to do a handstand. Some people will say that you should only ever do a handstand with your stomach facing the wall, while other videos will teach you how to do a handstand with your back against the wall, which I'm about to do. So I'll just say that you should just do whatever works for you. You know, if there are any sort of form issues that come about because you're doing it with your back against the wall, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. You can fix those later, as I've done. Here are some pictures that show what my handstands look like today. They weren't always like that. At one point they were banana handstands, but as I mentioned, I fixed them. It's okay. You can make adjustments along the way. It doesn't have to be absolutely perfect from day one. All right, so one quick thing worth addressing before we get into the warm-up and the actual handstand tutorial is shoulder mobility. If you cannot raise your hands over your head like this, you're going to have a very difficult time doing a handstand. So it should be very comfortable for you to just raise your hands directly overhead and get your arms vertical. So if you have some issues raising your hands above your head fully vertical, I would recommend going onto YouTube and searching some shoulder mobility exercises, because that's not something I'm going to cover here. Okay, so the next thing we need to cover is warming up our wrists. This is very important since our entire body weight is going to be on our wrists, something that usually doesn't get all that much stress throughout the day. So this is something I definitely recommend doing before you ever do handstands, and I recommend doing it every time, every day you plan on doing handstands, because the few times that I've jumped into handstands without warming up are the few times that I've injured myself, and wrist injuries actually take quite a bit of time to recover from. So take the 5-10 minutes to warm up your wrists, which I'll show you how to do right now. So I don't do anything crazy with my wrist warm-ups. You really just want to get your wrists warm and get your wrists moving. So I'll usually do some circles like this, clockwise, counterclockwise. I'll do that with both wrists. Just get them moving around a little bit. And then I'll also kind of get into a leaning forward position like this and just begin to slowly apply pressure onto your wrists. You don't want to like throw all of your body weight onto it, but you know, just get a slight forward lean, lean back, lean forward. This shouldn't be painful. It should kind of feel like any stretch that just feels good, feels like you're loosening up your muscles. So I'll do that for a little bit, even turn my hands around like this. This is the opposite of the previous stretch we were doing, whereas this one we were kind of leaning forward to get the stretch. Now that we're having our hands face towards us, you would want to kind of pull back, sit your hips back to get that stretch. And again, you can pull this all the way down, or you can kind of pulse and go forward and backwards. And then I'll even turn them in like this. And again, just kind of try to push against the ground, generate some level of pressure, but nothing insane. And any sort of ligament or tendon injury takes quite a bit of time to recover from. And I've had injuries that were so painful that I literally wasn't able to do handstands for like weeks. So take the extra few minutes to warm up your wrists so that they're ready to practice a handstand. So the first thing we're gonna do here is get comfortable getting upside down and just being upside down in general. So we're actually gonna do this with our stomach against the wall, and you'll start this by getting into a push-up position
and walking your feet up the wall while walking your hands towards the wall. And you want to get your hands as close to the wall as possible, and just be mindful of your balance so that you don't fall over. Now, once you're upside down, you want to keep your legs close together, your legs tight, activate your glutes, keep those tight, keep your core tight. But more importantly, you want to think about actually pushing against the ground. You don't want to be just passively kind of sitting there. You want to be pushing against the ground, doing what they call opening your shoulders and really pushing against the ground. It should feel like you're doing work here. You don't want to just kind of be upside down hanging out there. You want to be upside down while pushing against the ground. And once you hang out there for a little bit and you kind of get a good feel for what it's like to be upside down, you can just slowly begin to walk your hands back out towards that original push-up position while slowly walking your feet down with it.
So once you've done that a few times and you've gotten comfortable being upside down, you no longer have a fear of being inverted, and you've gotten a feel for exactly how much strength and energy it takes to actually be upside down and hold yourself upright, we can move on to the real fun part of learning how to do a handstand, and that's the handstand wall kick-ups.
So to do a handstand kick-up, you're going to start in this kind of hybrid lunge push-up position. So two things to focus on here is one, your legs. You'll have one leg bent closer to your torso and then one leg behind you. And then your arms, you want to be perpendicular to the ground. You basically want them to be straight up off the ground. It's a very common error to kind of lean a little bit closer towards your feet, and this just makes it even harder to kick off the ground and actually get upside down. Now, once you're ready to get upright, you want to kick off the ground much harder than most people realize and really think about lifting your hips up into the air. And as soon as you kick up off the ground, you also want to focus on getting your legs together as quickly as possible. It's very common for people to kind of kick up and then their legs just kind of flail around and spread apart into a V. They don't really have much control over them. So as soon as you kick up off the ground, focus on getting those legs together, keeping them tight until you eventually hit the wall.
Now this next exercise that we're going to do, we're going to continue doing against the wall. But the interesting thing here is that we're actually going to kick up into that handstand, and then we're going to make ourselves fall on purpose. So what we're trying to do here is learn how to engage our fingers to help us push off the wall and eventually help us balance in a handstand. And a good way to visualize this is to get down into a squat position like this and slowly lean forward. And as you lean forward, pay attention to what happens to your toes. Because if you're kind of in a neutral position like this, where you're not working too hard, you might not really notice it. But if you slowly lean forward, you'll notice that your toes start to dig into the ground. They start to press into the ground. And that's what we're going to be trying to do with our hands. We're going to kick up into a handstand, and then we're literally going to press our fingers into the ground, probably as hard as you can. You're going to push your fingers into the ground as hard as you can and actually try and make yourself fall over. And one way to help do this is when you kick up into a handstand, don't actually leave your hand flat on the ground. Take your hand, if it's in a flat position, and kind of curl your fingers up like this. Because if your hand is flat, it's going to be really hard to push against the ground, or it's going to be harder to push against the ground. Whereas if your fingers are up and kind of in a curled position like this, your fingers actually have something to push against, and it's easier to engage your fingers. So going back to our kneeling example like this, when we lean forward, our toes begin to really dig into the ground, and you can even just rest your hands on your toes, kind of lean forward, and you'll feel your toes just really grip into the ground. And it's one of those things that we don't even think about because we've been walking for so long. We're bipedal creatures. We move around on our hands and feet. We move around on our feet. So when we begin to learn how to stand on our hands, we kind of have to learn how to engage our hands in the same way with our feet that we never even think about anymore. So when you're on your hands, make sure to curl your fingers up a little bit, really dig into the ground, and start trying to fall over on purpose. And this is what that looks like.
So here I'm kicking up against the wall, And once I'm inverted, I'm really pushing against the ground as hard as I can with my fingers and letting myself fall down. It's helpful to pay attention to my feet here and notice that I'm not kicking off against the wall. I'm literally just pushing against the ground with my fingers and letting my legs eventually fall off the ground. That's one of the big mistakes that people here make, is rather than pushing through their fingers and pushing their body off the wall, they use their feet and kick off the wall, which is not what we're trying to do.
Now, once you've gotten comfortable with that, once you've gotten to the point to where you can kick up against the wall, push with your fingers, and get yourself to fall down without using your feet, that's the big key here. The next step is to begin trying to pulse yourself against the wall. So we're gonna engage our fingers until we come off the wall, but then try and let off so that we hit the wall again. And we're gonna try and get this to a point to where eventually we're just pulsing ourselves in an upright position with the wall there in case we fall. And this is really what a handstand is. It might not look like it if you're watching somebody who's really good at them. It might look like they're literally just standing there. But if you could get inside their mind, or if you could get really close to their hands and watch, there's this constant fight. There's this constant readjustment that's happening, and that's what we're trying to build towards. So when you're doing this exercise and you kick up to the wall, you push on the ground, you come off, you let off from your push, you fall back against the wall. This is the process that you're just going to have to keep repeating over and over and over again until that pushing and letting off isn't so drastic. It's not that you're pushing off and then you're letting off and hitting the wall again. Eventually you're pushing off, letting off until you're kind of in a balanced state. And this isn't something that's gonna happen overnight. It's gonna take a long time to develop. You need a lot of practice. You should ideally practice at least 5-10 minutes every day. Be patient with it and just know that it's gonna take time. So now, instead of kicking up against the wall, pushing against the ground, and intentionally falling back towards the ground, let me show you what it looks like when you kick up against the wall, push, release, maybe hit the wall again, maybe not, push, release, and what that fight begins to look like.
Now, once again here, I'm kicking up against the wall. And once I'm vertical, I begin to push through my fingers until I can feel my feet come off the wall. And once I do, I let off from pushing until my feet hit the wall again. And then I just keep repeating this process, pushing and letting off while staying upright the entire time.
All right, so now we're at the grand finale of handstands, removing the wall from our handstands. Now, this is scary for most people, and it's easily the part of doing a handstand that terrifies them the most, but it's something you inevitably have to do, and it's just a part of eventually getting your first freestanding handstand. Now, a couple of tips here. If you do have a spotter, I would recommend using a spotter. If you have a family member or a friend that can spot you, that's really all you need. If you don't, which I didn't, the most I can recommend is having some sort of mattress or some sort of pad behind you, although that can get in the way and you might roll an ankle on it, so it's not foolproof either. But maybe a grassy area would be the next best bet, as opposed to a garage floor like the one I'm on right now. Now, the most important part here is knowing how to dismount out of a handstand, because if anything goes wrong, you need to be able to get down safely. Unfortunately, the dismount itself also terrifies people. So 2 things that I will recommend when you're working on your dismount is to, 1, commit to the handstand and commit to dismounting, commit to bailing out, and 2, to always leave at least one hand on the ground. Do not panic and try to lift up your hands. Do not panic and, I don't know, do something with your hands. At least keep one planted, because if you're upside down and there's at least one hand on the ground, then you can safely kind of fall and use that as a pivot point to get back down towards the ground safely. So let me show you how to dismount.
So similar to kicking up to a wall here, once I'm upside down, I begin to kind of twist out towards one side. For me, the right side feels more natural since I am right-handed. But once I'm upside down and I begin to twist out, you can see that I keep one hand planted on the ground. This ensures that I don't just collapse and fall towards the ground. So I keep that left arm planted and straight on the ground. And then as I fall, I just continue to fall with it and keep that left arm planted until my feet are back on the ground. Now, if committing to that full kick up is a little too intimidating, I totally understand. And one way to kind of work towards this is to just do like little tiny kick ups and practice keeping that one hand planted. So here you can see I don't really kick up all the way. I just kick up a little bit and begin twisting towards that right side while keeping my hands planted on the ground. And as you get comfortable with this, you can slowly begin kicking higher and higher until eventually you're kicking up into a full vertical handstand and pirouetting out of it comfortably while keeping one hand planted on the ground.
Now, another thing I would recommend here, if you don't have a spotter, or even if you do have a spotter, is to film yourself kicking up without a wall, whether you're practicing your freestanding handstand or you're practicing how to dismount and bail out of a handstand. Film yourself, because more often than not, you're not kicking up nearly as high as you think you are. You think you're kicking up and you're almost fully vertical and you're scared that you're gonna fall over, when really you're nowhere near it. So especially when you're practicing your dismount for the first few times, film yourself so that you can see exactly how high it is that you're kicking, because more than likely you're getting about halfway up and you're freaking out over nothing. Well, there it is. That is my introduction on how to get to your first handstand. Like I said, if you search around on YouTube, you're gonna find a lot of very opinionated people that will say you should never do a back to wall handstand ever. I get where they're coming from, but again, I think they're coming from a position of having done handstands for 5 or 10 years, and they've now perfected their technique and they have a lot of opinions on how to get the perfect form and all of that. But when you're just starting out, it really doesn't matter all that much. You can fine tune those things later, so wouldn't worry about it too much right now. Now remember, just like a baby learning how to walk, it doesn't happen overnight. And learning how to stand on your hands isn't going to happen overnight either. So be patient, be consistent, and like I mentioned earlier, I would recommend doing handstand practice at least for 5-10 minutes a day. Just squeeze in a little bit here and there. It really adds up. And if you stick to it and put in the work, you'll get your first handstand. Now, if you end up getting your very first handstand, please let me know about it. Comment below, DM me on Instagram, something. Just send me a link and let me know that any of the tips I gave in this video helped you out and that you eventually got your first handstand. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, please like the video and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with more content like this.